"Don't take advantage, don't stick it in." The rancher did, and fury followed. Eli Thompson had always believed that life on the ranch was simple, but it was never easy. The sun rose over the Montana prairie like a slow, golden tide, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Dust swirled gently along the dirt roads, and the scent of hay, cattle, and earth mixed in the cool morning air. Eli, a man in his late 40s, stood at the edge of his property, a worn leather hat on his head, and watched the horizon. The ranch had been in his family for 3 generations, and every fence, every barn, every pasture held memories of hard work, sacrifice, and sometimes loneliness. Eli's hands were calloused, evidence of years spent tending cattle, repairing fences, and breaking horses. His skin was weathered, and his eyes were sharp, the kind that seemed to see everything around him. People in the nearby town respected him, sometimes even feared him because Eli lived by a strict code. He believed in honesty, hard work, and fairness, but he also believed that the world was a place where the strong survived and the weak were tested. On that morning, Eli moved through the barn, the boards creaking under his boots. The cattle were lowing, a soft rhythm that matched the beat of his own heart. He checked each pen, feeding the animals and making sure that no fences were broken. Even in such a routine, there was a rhythm to ranch life, a sense of purpose. Eli liked that. Life here, despite its hardships, made sense. Everything had a reason, and every action had a consequence. It was during the late morning that Lucas arrived. The young man had only recently moved to Montana from a small town several hours away. He had heard about Eli Thompson, about the ranch, and about the work ethic required to survive in this part of the country. Lucas was in his early 20s, with bright eyes that carried curiosity and determination. He wore worn jeans, a faded shirt, and a baseball cap that had seen better days. He had no family here, no connections, only the desire to work hard and learn from someone who knew the land. Eli first saw Lucas walking down the dirt road that led to the ranch. He watched the young man approach, carrying a small bag over his shoulder. There was something about him, his posture, the way he walked with a mix of confidence and caution, that made Eli pause. Eli was used to people showing up and giving up quickly once they saw the hard work required on a ranch, but Lucas did not appear afraid. Instead, he seemed respectful, and that mattered to Eli. "Morning," Eli said, his voice firm but not unkind. He tilted his hat back slightly and studied the young man. "Morning, sir. I'm Lucas. I'm here for the farmhand position," Lucas replied, his voice steady but polite. Eli nodded slowly. "All right, follow me. I'll show you what needs doing." The first day was hard, as Eli expected it to be. He had Lucas start with simple chores, feeding the cattle, mending fences, and cleaning the barn. Every task required attention to detail. One missed nail or a loose board could cause an accident, and Eli was never one to take chances. As Lucas worked, Eli watched quietly, correcting him gently when mistakes were made, but praising him when the work was done well. By noon, the sun was high, beating down on the land, and the young man was sweating, his shirt clinging to his back. Eli handed him a water bottle. "Drink, you'll need it." Lucas took it gratefully, and for a moment, the two of them simply stood in the barn, listening to the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional rustle of the wind through the grass. It was a peaceful sound, almost comforting, and Lucas felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced before. He realized that this work, though exhausting, was honest, and he respected that. Over the next few weeks, Lucas learned the rhythm of the ranch. He learned how to ride horses, how to anticipate the movements of cattle, and how to repair fences quickly and efficiently. He learned which tools were best for certain tasks, and how to manage his time so that work was done thoroughly and correctly. Eli was a demanding teacher, but he was fair. He expected perfection, but he also understood mistakes were part of learning. Eli, on the other hand, began to notice qualities in Lucas that he appreciated. He noticed the young man's patience, his willingness to take on tasks without complaint, and his genuine curiosity about every detail of ranch life. There was something rare about Lucas, something that reminded Eli of himself when he was younger, someone who respected the land, the work, and the people who lived by it. The local town soon took notice of Lucas as well. People mentioned to Eli that he had a strong work ethic and a polite, humble nature. Some villagers even suggested that Lucas might stay for the long term, perhaps becoming part of the ranch's future. Eli didn't say much to them, though. He knew that trust had to be earned over time, and he wasn't willing to hand it out lightly. Evenings on the ranch were quiet and contemplative. Eli would sit on the porch of his small wooden house, sipping black coffee and watching the sunset. The sky turned deep orange and purple, the prairie stretching endlessly into the distance. Lucas often joined him, sitting on the steps, quietly reflecting on the day's work. Sometimes they talked about the land, about ranching, about life. Other times there was no need for words. The silence itself was enough, a shared understanding that hard work, respect, and honesty mattered above all else. But even in this calm there were whispers of tension, not between Eli and Lucas, but within the town. People talked about Eli's strict nature, about how he could be demanding and intimidating. Some wondered if Lucas would withstand the pressure of ranch life under Eli's supervision. There was also an unspoken rule about respect and boundaries. Everyone knew that trust had limits, and crossing those lines could lead to serious consequences. Eli had learned this the hard way. In his younger days, he had seen colleagues and neighbors act recklessly, ignoring the rules of the land, of the community, and of personal conduct. The results had often been devastating: broken friendships, ruined reputations, and sometimes worse. That was why Eli maintained a clear code for those who worked with him. Respect the land, respect each other, and respect the rules. Step outside those boundaries and there would be a price to pay. For now, Lucas seemed to fit well within those boundaries. He worked hard, learned quickly, and showed humility and patience. Eli found himself slowly lowering his guard, allowing Lucas into the routines of the ranch and even sharing stories from his own past. He spoke about his father and grandfather, about the hardships they endured, and about lessons learned the hard way. Lucas listened intently, absorbing every word, realizing that this wasn't just about working on a ranch, it was about understanding a way of life. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled over the prairie. Dark clouds formed quickly, and the wind picked up, shaking the barn doors. Eli and Lucas worked together to secure the cattle and tie down equipment. The rain began to fall heavily, turning the dirt roads into sticky mud. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the vast open fields in brief, stark bursts of light. In those moments of urgency, Lucas proved himself reliable, calm under pressure, and ready to take direction. Eli silently approved, his respect for the young man growing. As the storm subsided and the sun returned, the ranch seemed to sparkle with freshness. Puddles reflected the sky, and the air smelled clean and alive. Lucas wiped the rain from his brow, smiling despite being soaked. Eli nodded at him, a rare approving gesture. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between Eli and Lucas strengthened. Their connection was built on shared work, mutual respect, and a growing understanding of each other's character. The ranch, with all its challenges and rewards, became a place where Lucas felt he belonged, a place where his hard work was valued, and where he could learn from someone who had seen and endured much. Yet, even in this peaceful routine, the seeds of tension were quietly planted. Life on a ranch was unpredictable, and people often revealed themselves in unexpected ways when stress or temptation arrived. Eli's strict code had always served him well, but he knew that trust, once given, was fragile. One misstep could change everything. For now, though, the ranch thrived. Cattle grazed peacefully, fences stood strong, and the house was filled with the quiet sounds of life. Eli felt a cautious sense of hope. Perhaps with Lucas by his side, the ranch could continue to prosper. Perhaps there was a chance for the lessons he had learned over decades to be passed on, in a way that would honor both the land and the people who worked it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a soft, golden glow, Eli and Lucas sat quietly on the porch. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, a reminder that life, like the land, was vast and full of potential. In that moment, everything seemed possible. Hard work, respect, and patience, the core of ranch life, remained, and for the first time in a long while, Eli allowed himself to believe that the future, though uncertain, could be bright. And so the first chapter of their shared story came to a close, marked not by drama or conflict, but by quiet understanding, hard work, and the fragile beginnings of trust that would one day be tested. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm, as it often did. Eli Thompson continued to rise before dawn, his boots crunching on the frozen dirt road, the cold Montana air sharp against his face. The cattle needed feeding, fences needed mending, and the endless work required vigilance and care. Lucas had grown stronger, quicker, and more confident with each passing day. He learned the patterns of the ranch, the way the wind shifted across the plains, how the cattle moved, and when storms were likely to arrive. He followed Eli's instructions carefully, observing the subtle details that distinguished a skilled rancher from a beginner. Yet, life is rarely as simple as routine. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the prairie, a sense of unease stirred quietly within Eli. The ranch had been operating smoothly, but something about Lucas's presence seemed to stir emotions Eli had not confronted in years. Eli prided himself on maintaining a strict code: work hard, respect others, and avoid personal temptations. But even the strongest men carry weaknesses, hidden in the corners of their hearts. Eli noticed small things that day: the way Lucas laughed too freely at certain jokes, the way his eyes lingered on the older rancher, and the subtle gestures that betrayed his youth and curiosity. It was harmless on its surface, but Eli felt the stirrings of a dangerous pride. For years he had controlled everything on the ranch: cattle, land, workers, and even local gossip. But no one had ever questioned his authority or observed him closely. Lucas's presence was a reminder of both Eli's influence and the fragility of trust. At first, Eli ignored these feelings. He focused on the work, moving cattle to new pastures, fixing a broken water trough, and preparing feed for the coming winter. Lucas worked diligently beside him, following instructions and asking questions when unsure. There were moments when the young man struggled, particularly with the horses, which sometimes reacted unpredictably to sudden movements. But Lucas never complained. He accepted corrections, learned quickly, and respected Eli's experience. The days passed, and the bond between the two men seemed to grow stronger, built on shared labor and the quiet understanding of ranch life. They repaired fences together, riding side by side across miles of prairie. They repaired barns, painted gates, and discussed the future of the land. Lucas's curiosity was genuine, and Eli sometimes allowed himself to be proud of the young man's progress. However, trust is fragile, and boundaries can shift when people are tested in ways they do not expect. One evening, after an unusually long day of work, Eli and Lucas stayed late, tending to the last tasks before the night fully settled. The sky had turned deep purple and the prairie was quiet, almost eerie. The cattle had been moved into their pens and the barn doors were secured against the cool night wind. "Good work today," Eli said, his voice tired but approving. "You're learning faster than most young men I've trained. Keep this up and you might be able to manage part of the ranch someday." Lucas smiled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot coming from you. I'm trying my best." There was a pause, the kind of silence that falls naturally when two people share both exhaustion and quiet satisfaction. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, and the fading light painted the land in golden streaks. In those moments, Eli felt a mixture of pride, loneliness, and unwelcome temptation. He reminded himself repeatedly of the rules he had lived by for decades: respect others, respect boundaries, trust is earned and must never be broken. Yet in that quiet, isolated place, with no one around for miles and the darkness approaching, Eli felt the stirrings of a poor decision forming. The thought came, subtle at first, then louder, more insistent: the desire to assert control over someone who respected him, who trusted him completely. Eli pushed the thoughts away, busying himself with securing the barn. Yet the feeling lingered, like the smoke from a nearby fire, drifting silently and refusing to dissipate. He tried to focus on practical matters, ensuring all the gates were locked, the animals fed, and the tools returned to their proper places. Lucas followed his movements, asking questions about why things were done a certain way, eager to learn every nuance. Days turned into a week, and Eli found himself testing boundaries. It started innocently: a touch on the shoulder to guide Lucas while lifting heavy boards, a lingering glance during late-night tasks. Each action seemed small, harmless even, but each one chipped at the line Eli had always drawn between respect and authority. He told himself he would stop, that he could control it, but control is often easier in theory than in practice. Lucas, for his part, remained unaware of the growing tension. He admired Eli's knowledge, his experience, and the way he managed both the ranch and the people in his care. He respected Eli deeply and trusted him implicitly. To Lucas, the older man was a mentor, a guide, and perhaps the closest thing to family he had in this vast, lonely place. One afternoon, an accident on the ranch brought the underlying tension to the surface. A fence had collapsed, allowing a small herd of cattle to escape into a neighboring field. Eli and Lucas ran to contain the animals, their boots slipping in the soft earth, their hearts pounding from the chase. The chaos demanded cooperation and quick thinking. Lucas followed Eli's commands without hesitation, moving cattle back into the proper pens, pushing and pulling with the strength of youth and determination. After the cattle were secured, they both stood in the middle of the field, breathing heavily, mud on their clothes, sweat and dirt streaked across their faces. Eli felt a surge of admiration for Lucas. He had handled himself perfectly under pressure, proving himself capable and trustworthy. Yet, amidst the relief, Eli also felt the dangerous pull of his earlier impulses. He realized, with a sharp pang of guilt, that he was struggling to maintain the strict ethical code he had always followed. That evening, Eli stayed awake long after Lucas had gone to bed in the small bunkhouse on the ranch. He stared at the ceiling, reflecting on the choices he had made throughout his life, the mistakes he had avoided and the ones he had not. He knew that trust, once broken, could never be repaired fully. He thought about the whispers of the townspeople, about the stories of other ranchers who had faltered, and about the quiet warning that had always been part of his life. Respect boundaries, no matter the temptation. But Eli also knew something else. Life on the ranch was harsh, lonely, and isolating. It demanded more than skill. It demanded control, restraint, and moral clarity. Any lapse could ripple outward, affecting not only himself but everyone around him. And yet, despite his awareness, the temptation lingered, a shadow at the edge of his judgment. Lucas continued to work hard, unaware of the internal struggle brewing in the older man. Each day, he proved his reliability, his patience, and his willingness to learn. He asked questions, sought advice, and showed respect not only for Eli but for the land itself. In many ways, he represented everything Eli valued: dedication, humility, and potential. Yet Eli felt the first stirrings of an inevitable test, the kind that would challenge his integrity and the very foundation of trust he had built with Lucas. It was subtle, quiet, almost imperceptible at first, but it was there. A choice looming on the horizon, one that would reveal character, strength, and the consequences of yielding to temptation. As the sun set over the prairie, casting long shadows and painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, Eli sat alone on the porch, staring into the distance. The ranch was quiet now, the cattle settled in their pens, and the tools stored for the night. He thought about the young man who had come to his ranch, seeking work, guidance, and belonging. Lucas had no idea how fragile the boundaries were, how easily trust could be broken. Eli understood that the coming days would test not just the young man, but himself. He had taught Lucas the rhythms of the ranch, the lessons of the land, and the importance of hard work. Now, the ultimate test would be whether Eli could uphold the principles he had lived by for decades, or whether a single misstep could unravel everything. And so the calm of the Montana prairie held its breath, the horizon stretching endlessly as if aware that life, like the land, could be unpredictable, unforgiving, and full of consequences. Eli Thompson, seasoned rancher and man of principle, faced a choice that would shape the course of both their lives. A choice between restraint and impulse, between respect and error. The ranch, the land, and the trust that had been carefully nurtured all hung in the balance, waiting silently for the next chapter to unfold. The days on the ranch had grown longer, and the air carried the hint of autumn, crisp and cool, brushing against the wide-open plains. Eli Thompson continued his daily routine, rising before dawn, moving through the barn, checking the fences, and ensuring that the cattle were fed. Yet, beneath the surface of routine, an invisible tension had begun to grow. He felt it most when Lucas was near, a subtle reminder that trust once formed was delicate. Eli had always known that mistakes, big or small, could have ripple effects, but now he realized that even his thoughts could shape the course of events on the ranch. Lucas, oblivious to the growing storm within Eli, continued his work with steady determination. He learned quickly, anticipating the rancher's commands, observing the habits of the cattle, and mastering the art of repairing fences, saddling horses, and maintaining equipment. He asked questions, sometimes too many, but always with curiosity and genuine intent. Eli appreciated his diligence and ability to focus, yet he also noticed the young man's eagerness could be interpreted as overconfidence, a sign that inexperience could lead to errors if left unchecked. One morning, a serious problem arose. A gate had been left slightly open overnight, allowing a small herd of calves to wander toward a steep ravine. Eli discovered it just as the sun was rising, the light casting long shadows over the uneven terrain. Panic surged through him. A fall down that ravine could be deadly for the calves. Without hesitation, he called out for Lucas. "Lucas, get over here. The calves are loose near the east ravine." Eli's voice carried across the fields. Lucas ran toward him, his boots sinking into the soft earth, heart pounding with adrenaline. Together they sprinted across the prairie, their eyes scanning the herd. The calves were scattered, some grazing near the edge of the drop, others moving closer to the fence line. Time was critical, and both men worked with precision, guiding the animals back to safety. Once the cattle were secure, Eli felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief for the animals, but anger at the oversight that had allowed this to happen. He looked at Lucas, expecting to scold him, but then paused. Lucas had followed his instructions perfectly, staying calm and alert throughout the chaos. Eli realized the fault was minor and perhaps overlooked in the rush to manage multiple tasks. Yet even small mistakes could weigh heavily. That evening, Eli could not sleep. He walked to the edge of the property, staring at the prairie under a sky full of stars. His mind churned over the incident, considering how a simple lapse could have turned tragic. He thought about Lucas and the responsibility he carried, not just for the young man's safety, but for the integrity of the ranch and the legacy it represented. He reminded himself that leadership meant more than skill. It meant judgment, restraint, and patience. Days later, the tension escalated in a subtler way. Eli began noticing changes in his own behavior. His temper, usually calm and measured, seemed shorter. He found himself scrutinizing Lucas's movements more than necessary, questioning minor decisions, and occasionally speaking with a sharper tone than intended. The young man noticed this too, though he did not fully understand why. "Eli, did I do something wrong?" Lucas asked one evening after repairing a fence section that had been damaged in a recent windstorm. Eli paused, rubbing his jaw. "No, Lucas, everything is fine, just sometimes things need to be done exactly right. Precision matters." Lucas nodded, though a small shadow of uncertainty crossed his face. He returned to work quietly, trying not to let the moment unsettle him. Yet even subtle shifts in tone and behavior can have profound effects. The young man, once confident and cheerful, began to sense a tension he could not place, a quiet warning that something beneath the surface was amiss. As the days passed, Eli's inner conflict grew. He tried to maintain his authority, his composure, and the strict code of ethics he had followed for decades. But the isolation of the ranch, combined with his own pride and the intensity of his emotions, created a fertile ground for misjudgment. He found himself overthinking small interactions, replaying moments in his mind, and imagining scenarios that might never happen. The ranch, which had always been a place of straightforward work and clear consequences, now felt like a stage where every action could lead to unforeseen results. Lucas, meanwhile, continued to excel. He learned how to manage the horses with confidence, anticipate weather changes, and respond quickly to emergencies. He also began taking small initiatives, suggesting improvements to the water supply system and helping Eli organize the storage for winter feed. These actions should have been met with appreciation, yet Eli found himself feeling an odd mix of pride and unease. The young man's competence highlighted both his potential and Eli's fear of losing control. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. A neighbor, Mr. Harlan, came to discuss a potential sale of some unused land adjoining Eli's property. Harlan was a shrewd man, careful with words and observant of behavior. Lucas greeted him politely, offering a handshake and speaking confidently about the land, its condition, and its potential. Harlan seemed impressed, even nodding in approval at the young man's knowledge. Eli, however, felt a pang of discomfort. Lucas's competence, usually a source of pride, now seemed like a subtle challenge to his authority. The ranch, which had always been under Eli's control, now had another presence whose judgment and abilities could rival his own. He reminded himself to stay calm, to maintain perspective, and to focus on what truly mattered: the land, the cattle, and the young man's development. Yet the tension continued to grow. Eli began to notice Lucas's laughter, the easy way he interacted with neighbors, and the natural charm he displayed. These qualities, normally admirable, now stirred a complicated mix of admiration, envy, and concern within Eli. He realized that maintaining control required careful observation, subtle guidance, and occasionally, restraint in both action and thought. The turning point came during a stormy evening. Dark clouds had gathered, and heavy rain fell across the ranch, accompanied by strong winds that bent the trees and rattled the barn doors. Eli and Lucas were securing the cattle and reinforcing fences when lightning struck near the property, causing a small fire in a dry patch of grass. Immediate action was required to prevent the fire from spreading. Lucas acted swiftly, using water from nearby troughs and sand to control the flames. Eli worked alongside him, shouting instructions and guiding the young man to ensure every spark was extinguished. The storm raged on, lightning illuminating the wet fields in sharp, brief flashes. Despite the danger, Lucas remained calm, focused, and responsive, proving his ability to act decisively under pressure. Once the fire was out and the cattle were safe, Eli felt both relief and a renewed respect for Lucas. Yet in the same moment, he also felt the undercurrent of tension within himself, an awareness that his own emotions were fragile and easily influenced by stress, pride, and the unexpected intensity of trust. The experience reminded him that even the best intentions could be tested when circumstances grew extreme. In the days following the storm, Eli struggled internally. He knew that leadership required clarity, discipline, and moral strength. He reminded himself repeatedly that trust must never be violated, that boundaries existed for a reason, and that even small lapses could have consequences. But human nature is rarely perfect, and Eli realized that his own judgment was not immune to error. Lucas, for his part, sensed the subtle changes in Eli's behavior. He noticed that the older man seemed more distant at times, more contemplative, and occasionally sharper in his speech. Yet he also recognized the underlying care and mentorship that remained. He continued to work diligently, following instructions, learning quickly, and building his confidence in managing the ranch's challenges. The tension between them remained unspoken, a quiet shadow hovering over the property. Both men were aware, in different ways, that the balance of trust and authority was delicate. Eli knew that a single misstep could alter their relationship forever, while Lucas sensed that something beneath the surface was shifting but could not yet identify it. As autumn deepened, the prairie transformed. Golden grasses swayed in the wind, the cattle prepared for the coming cold, and the air carried the scent of earth, rain, and drying leaves. Eli and Lucas continued their work, maintaining the routines that had always defined ranch life. Yet the invisible tension persisted, a quiet reminder that even in the calm of routine, human emotions could be unpredictable, and the consequences of misjudgment could be far-reaching. One evening, Eli stood on the porch, watching the sunset, reflecting on the week's events. The storm, the fire, and the growing awareness of Lucas's capabilities had all stirred something within him. He realized that leadership was not just about authority. It was about understanding, patience, and the careful management of both people and emotion. The choices he made in the coming days would determine not only the success of the ranch, but also the integrity of the trust he had built with the young man who now worked alongside him. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter. The calm of the prairie, the rhythm of the ranch, and the growing bond between mentor and apprentice created a fragile balance. Eli knew that the coming days would test this balance, that mistakes could no longer be avoided, and that the consequences of human choices, both good and ill, would soon reveal themselves in ways that could not be ignored. The ranch, quiet and vast under the setting sun, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the unfolding of events that would challenge both men. In the distance, the wind whispered through the trees, as if signaling that life, like the land, was unpredictable, full of trials and demanding of both courage and wisdom. Montana prairie was quiet that morning, the sun rising slowly over the wide, open fields. Eli Thompson walked the property, boots crunching over the dirt and frost-covered grass. Everything looked normal, The cattle were grazing calmly, fences stood firm, and the barn doors were closed. Yet Eli felt a tension he could not ignore. Weeks of small decisions, quiet struggles, and unchecked impulses had accumulated. He knew the balance between trust and responsibility was fragile, and today that balance would be tested. Lucas had arrived early, eager to begin the day's work. He approached Eli with a smile, carrying tools and equipment for repairing a section of fence that had been weakened by a recent windstorm. "Good morning, Eli. Ready to tackle this section?" he asked, his voice cheerful and confident. Eli nodded, masking the unease that churned within him. "Yes, let's get it done," he replied. There was nothing unusual about the task itself, but Eli's mind was heavy with the awareness that choices made in moments of weakness could not be taken back. The lessons of restraint, trust, and responsibility weighed on him more sharply than ever. As they worked together, Eli found himself observing Lucas more than usual. The young man moved efficiently, handling the tools with skill and following instructions precisely. Eli felt pride in the work, but the shadow of prior tension remained. He knew that authority and mentorship were delicate. They could be strengthened through respect and honesty, or shattered by a single lapse in judgment. The morning passed without incident. Lucas repaired the fence efficiently, and Eli carefully inspected each post and board, ensuring the work met the ranch's high standards. By midday, the work was complete, and the two men paused to rest under the shade of a large oak tree near the edge of the property. Lucas drank water from his bottle, wiping sweat from his brow, while Eli sat silently, contemplating the challenges that had brought them to this point. It was then that the first signs of confrontation emerged. A neighboring rancher, Mr. Harlan, arrived unexpectedly, accompanied by two others from the town. Their expressions were serious, and Eli noticed immediately that something had shifted. Rumors had been circulating about the events on his property, the minor accident with the calves, the storm, and the fire, and word had reached the nearby community. "Eli, we need to talk," Harlan said, his voice firm but controlled. "There are concerns about the management here and the well-being of your workers. People are watching, and questions are being asked." Eli felt a surge of frustration. He had maintained the ranch for decades, ensuring safety, fairness, and hard work. Yet now outside eyes threatened to judge him based on incomplete information. He took a deep breath, recognizing that anger would solve nothing. "I understand," he said slowly. "Let's sit down and discuss what needs to be clarified." Lucas stood nearby, attentive but cautious. He did not fully understand the gravity of the conversation, but he sensed the seriousness in the older man's tone. Eli guided him to stay close, observing how he carried himself and noting the quiet confidence that had grown over weeks of shared labor. As the discussion unfolded, Eli realized that the moment was critical. Every word, every gesture, and every decision mattered. He maintained calm, explaining the events of the past weeks clearly and truthfully, acknowledging minor errors but emphasizing the diligence, care, and competence that he and Lucas had demonstrated. He spoke honestly about the storm, the escaped calves, and the fire, highlighting how both men had acted decisively to prevent serious harm. The neighboring ranchers listened, nodding in understanding, though their expressions remained cautious. Eli could feel the tension slowly easing, replaced by a grudging respect for the thoroughness and transparency he displayed. Yet the day was far from over. The real challenge was not the questions of neighbors, but the internal reckoning that would follow, the confrontation of past impulses, the acknowledgement of mistakes, and the responsibility that must be carried forward. As the visitors departed, Eli and Lucas returned to their work. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the warm glow of late afternoon sunlight. Eli paused, glancing at Lucas with a mix of pride and reflection. He realized that the young man's growth had been remarkable, not just in skill, but in character. Lucas had demonstrated patience, respect, and courage under pressure, qualities that Eli valued above all else. Yet, Eli also knew that the most important lessons were still ahead. Trust, once challenged, could not be restored simply with words or actions. It required time, consistency, and the unwavering demonstration of integrity. Eli had felt the stirrings of temptation, the quiet tests of judgment, and the tension between authority and vulnerability. Now he understood that the true measure of leadership was the ability to act with clarity, fairness, and self-control, even when emotions were intense and circumstances difficult. As evening approached, Eli gathered the cattle near the barn for the night. Lucas assisted, guiding the animals with care and efficiency. The sky turned shades of orange and purple, and a gentle wind rustled through the tall grasses. There was a sense of calm, but Eli remained vigilant, aware that the consequences of choices, both his and Lucas's, would continue to unfold in subtle ways. Later, as they rested on the porch, Eli spoke to Lucas in a quiet, reflective tone. "You've done well, Lucas. I've seen how much you've grown in the past weeks. You've handled yourself in ways I could not have expected. Remember, though, that the work we do here is more than skill. It's about responsibility, respect, and trust." Lucas nodded, listening intently. "I understand, Eli. I've learned a lot from you, more than I could have imagined. I want to do things the right way always." Eli felt a sense of relief, tempered by the awareness of the past challenges. The moments of tension, the mistakes, and the tests of judgment had been real, and the consequences could have been severe. Yet, through honesty, transparency, and mutual respect, the foundation of trust had endured. The following days brought renewed focus and purpose. Eli and Lucas continued their work, repairing fences, tending cattle, and maintaining the barn. Each task was completed with care, reinforcing the lessons of responsibility and diligence. The prairie, vast and ever-changing, provided a constant reminder that life was unpredictable, demanding both resilience and wisdom. Eli also reflected on his own conduct, recognizing the importance of self-awareness, restraint, and moral clarity. He understood that leadership required not only skill, but also the careful management of emotions and impulses. The quiet moments of reflection, the challenges faced together with Lucas, and the support of the community had all contributed to a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a rancher, a mentor, and a person of integrity. As autumn deepened, the prairie was alive with color, the golden grasses swaying in the wind, the cattle grazing peacefully, and the sky painted with the soft hues of sunset. Eli and Lucas worked side by side, their partnership strengthened by shared experience, challenges overcome, and mutual respect. The lessons of trust, responsibility, and perseverance had been tested, and both men emerged with a clearer understanding of their roles, their values, and the delicate balance of human relationships. By the end of the season, the ranch was in excellent condition. Fences were strong, barns were secure, and the cattle were healthy and well-fed. The community had observed the efforts of both men, and respect for their diligence and integrity had grown. Eli felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the legacy of his family's ranch was secure, and that Lucas had not only learned the skills necessary to maintain it, but also the values that would guide him through future challenges. One crisp evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, Eli and Lucas stood on the porch, looking out over the vast prairie. The wind carried the scent of earth, hay, and the first hints of winter. Eli placed a hand on the young man's shoulder, a simple gesture of affirmation and connection. "You've done well, Lucas," Eli said, his voice steady and sincere. "Remember these lessons: hard work, responsibility, respect. They matter more than anything else. Keep them close and you'll do well in life, no matter where it takes you." Lucas smiled, understanding the depth of the words. "Thank you, Eli, I won't forget." In that moment, the prairie was quiet, the work complete for the day, and the bond between mentor and apprentice stronger than ever. The challenges they had faced, the tensions they had navigated, and the lessons they had learned were all part of the story of the ranch. A story of trust, responsibility, and the strength of human character. The night fell over the Montana plains, stars appearing one by one in the dark sky. Eli and Lucas returned to their respective quarters, each reflecting on the past weeks, the tests, the growth, and the choices that had shaped them. They had faced challenges, both external and internal, and had emerged with a clearer understanding of what it meant to lead, to learn, and to respect the bonds that hold people together. The ranch, resilient and enduring, remained a symbol of perseverance and integrity. Eli Thompson, seasoned and wise, understood the value of restraint and trust. Lucas, young and capable, had learned the importance of humility, diligence, and ethical conduct. Together, they had navigated trials that tested character, judgment, and the strength of human relationships. As the prairie lay under the quiet light of the moon, the story of the ranch, the mentor, and the apprentice reached a place of balance. The lessons learned would guide them in the future. The trust they had built would endure, and the values they had upheld, responsibility, respect, and integrity, would remain at the heart of their lives. Life on the ranch continued, as it always did, with hard work, careful attention, and the understanding that every choice mattered. The legacy of the land, the cattle, and the people who tended them was secure, built on effort, honesty, and the quiet strength of character. And in the vast, open Montana prairie, Eli Thompson and Lucas walked forward together, prepared for whatever challenges might come, confident in the trust they had forged and the lessons they had learned.